Hello, I am Shawnee Blackwell Jennings, and this is a character profile on Arthur meursault from The Stranger by Albert Camus. Marie came that evening and asked me if I'd marry her. I said I didn't mind. If she was keen on it, we'd get married. Then she asked me again if I loved her. I replied much as before that her question meant nothing, or next to nothing, but I supposed I didn't. If that's how you feel, she said, why marry me? I explained that it had no importance really, but if it would give her pleasure, we could get married right away. I pointed out, anyhow, the suggestion came from her. As for me, I had merely said yes. Now let's introduce ourselves. We've got our timeline up here at the top, and the artwork is done by Yeji Yoon. First, Arthur wakes up to a telegram that his mother has died. He goes to his funeral at the rest home. This is not without feeling judgment from his boss, or perceived judgment in Arthur's case. And once he's there, he doesn't really show a lot of emotion. He doesn't cry. In fact, he's quite annoyed when others cry at his mother's funeral. The day after, he meets with Marie, the girl he's been seeing. They go and see a movie together, a comedy, then go and enjoy each other's company at the local pool. They then end the day sleeping together in Arthur's bed, and she ends up leaving before he wakes. His neighbor Raymond then comes into his house a couple days later unannounced, and Arthur listens to him talk for hours, just about nothing really. This guy is kind of an abusive guy. Arthur is aware of this, but he feels no need to interject because he, in his mind, doesn't know the reason that he beats on women, and so maybe they deserve it in Arthur's mind. Marie later that night asks Arthur to marry her. He then says yes. She asks if he loves her, where he says no. Raymond then beats his mistress at that same time, and it causes a commotion in the whole apartment building. Everybody ends up in the hallway. Raymond tells Arthur it's because she was cheating and he found out. Arthur testifies this to police without any question, any hesitation. Arthur, Marie, and Raymond then make a weekend trip to the beach the next day as previously planned. Arthur and Raymond get into a fight with knives and fists with the mistress's brother at the beach. They then go back to the beach house where Marie has made some food for everyone. Arthur wants to go get some fresh air, or so he says, but he goes back to the beach later that night with a revolver. He sees the brother of the mistress, who, it's important to note, is an Arabic man, and he shoots him 5 times and leaves him there. He's then promptly arrested and taken to jail for exactly a year before his trial starts, where he's sentenced to death. And it's important to note here also, he is not liked during his trial because of his views. Him putting his mom into a care home is brought into question. Just how he acts is brought into question in everyday life. Later, a priest comes to visit him in prison and tells him that there's still hope and he can turn to God for forgiveness and that he can be saved. Arthur screams at this priest that none of this matters and we are all going to die, so what does it matter if I am forgiven? The Arab man that I shot wasn't forgiven and wasn't saved. So yeah, that's a little introduction. Now let's talk about Arthur meursault, the unmoved man and our main character. He is first shown to us as a man with little interest and emotion for anything, and he doesn't shy away from this. In fact, he never tries to fake emotion, even if he feels like he should. Quote, I felt the urge to reassure him that I was just like everybody else. Just like everybody else. Arthur says this in the moment where he's talking to his lawyer, and he's very nonchalant about how the murder happened. And he just feels very judged, and he feels like he should make up for that, but he doesn't. He is often observing and living life, but not really partaking in life itself, and living and experiencing joys of the world. And he's also indifferent to the rules of the world. At times he's perplexed or annoyed at others care about certain things. At his mother's funeral, While his mother's best friend sobbed, he says, "Still the woman sobbed. I was rather surprised as I didn't know who she was. I wanted her to stop crying, but dared not speak to her. At first the keeper went silent. At first the keeper kept silent. Then, without looking at me, he explained, 'She was devoted to your mother. She says your mother was her only friend in the world, and now she's all alone.' I had nothing to say, and the silence lasted quite a while." He sees himself as an outsider looking in, perhaps at all times, and he only opens up to the meaning of life when his is about to end, and even at that moment, he relishes and relinquishes in the fact that the meaning of living is actually meaningless, and we all have the same fate, and we are all going to die. There is no love of life without despair of life. Albert Camus, Lyrical and Critical Essays. Albert Camus is our author. He's Algerian-born. He's a philosopher, author, playwright, and journalist, born to French parents in 1913. And I'd also like to add, he is an extreme activist and revolutionist. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1957 for literature and died in 1960 in a car accident. And The Stranger was inspired by the trial by Franz Kafka, and actually Albert by Kafka in general. Quote, "He had read and reread Kafka, whose work seemed to him prophetic, one of the most significant of our time. And the reporter for the New York French-language newspaper La Victoire contributed to the thought that Camus himself was our Kafka without dreams." Albert Camus came to France at age 25 in 1938, and we all know what happened in 1939, so he soon, after he got there, joined the resistance to the occupation in France during World War II. His works often include themes of finality of death, isolation, and the disillusionment of citizens post-war. Something that contributed to these themes was him being a courtroom reporter in the Algiers before moving to France, and he did that for about 2 years. He also wrote, produced, acted for, and adapted plays for the Théâtre du Travail, a resistance acting troupe focused on bringing theater to working-class citizens, like Camus himself, a luxury that the upper class only mostly got to partake in. Now, who is our audience and who's meant to be reading this? Everyone. Anybody who has had a thought or feeling. This book explores the harsh realities of the finality of life, all from the unique perspective of someone so apathetic about life, you're not even sure if he's actually living or a ghost. The book was inspired by Camus' experience in World War II, his experience in courtrooms, and his experience as a working class man. He uses that experience to invoke thought in all of us. Albert wants us to think about the absurdity of finding passion and meaning in a life and world that is so cold and cruel at times, but beautiful in others. He wants all of us to think about the strange and unspoken rules of how one should or shouldn't act. The intended audience is anyone who can pick this book up and read about it and think about it, and have a conversation with themselves. Yes, nothing matters, but that is exactly why we should be living how we want. Quote, "I had done this, and I hadn't done that. Nothing mattered, and I knew why. So did he. Throughout the whole absurd life I've lived, a dark wind had been rising towards me from somewhere deep in my future, across years that were still to come, and as it passed, the wind leveled whatever was offered to me at the time, in years no more real than the ones I was living." Now let's talk about autonomy, judgment, and loss. Huge themes in this book. Loss and judgments are not only concepts that are recurring in this book, but they are solidified as those recurring themes extremely early on in the book, on page 1. Arthur starts the book, the first line, with, "Mother died today. Or maybe yesterday, I can't be sure." And later on says, "I have fixed up with my employer for 2 days' leave. Obviously under the circumstances he couldn't refuse. Still, I had an idea he looked annoyed, and I said without thinking, 'Sorry, sir, but it's not my fault, you know.'" Arthur feels like his autonomy is constrained by social norms, and outsider expectations. Like, he's not able to move freely through the world like he wants to or should be able to in his mind. He is constantly worried about the judgments of others and what he ought to be doing versus what he is doing, which is funny because that is the exact thing he hates. A great example of this is during the trial, where his mother's care is brought into question and the intention behind killing the nameless Arab man is brought into question. And Arthur has an answer for them. In terms of killing the Arabic man, he says, "It just happened that way. I had no intention of that." But the court doesn't want to hear that, and the social norms behind that kind of are pressing him to worry if he should be acting a certain way or not. Arthur also loses everything. This starts from his mother dying to him going to prison and losing his girlfriend. I mean, not really girlfriend, but his girlfriend and his friend and his autonomy. And it's all taken away from him. This is not just something that has gone away. It's been taken away by the justice system. And this is taken in the same way that he took all of that away from the Arabic man that he murdered. When he's talking to his lawyer, he says this: "On my way out, I was even going to shake his hand, but I remembered just in time that I'd killed a man." This brings us to indifference, existentialism, and absurdity. Existentialism, which is a theme that is not uncommon to Camus' work, who wrote The Myth of Sisyphus. It is also not new to Arthur, our main character, who thinks existentially from beginning to end. On page 79, he says, "But I reminded myself, it's common knowledge that life isn't worth living anyhow." When on trial, Arthur's indifference actually highlights the ridiculousness and absurdity of the justice system, even today's justice system in many ways. When asked again about if he intended to kill the man, he just says, quote, "It just happened that way," which causes an uproar in the judge and jury, who are trying to find anything to spin just how evil Arthur really is. And also, in trying to do this, they bring up the day after his mother's funeral, and he's asked about going to the local pool and seeing the comedy movie with Marie. And it's spun that he is such an evil son. He could possibly not be in mourning if he did all of this fun stuff the day after his mother's funeral, the funeral that he didn't even cry at, mind you. Arthur, at the end, is a character who does just understand the laughable song and dance we find ourselves in daily, which is trying to take life so serious and put meaning to everything, when in the end we just die. He's okay with the thought of nothing now and nothing after, and only opens up to the meaningless moments of bliss that make life what it is at the end of his life. Moments before he actually accepts that he is going to die and that he found bliss in miniature moments, minute moments. He says, "I may not have been sure about what did interest me, but I was absolutely sure about what didn't. I felt as I hadn't felt for ages. I had a foolish desire to burst into tears. For the first time, I'd realized how all these people loathed me." A stranger? Let's watch. Yes, Arthur himself is a stranger, not only to his neighbors, to Raymond, to Marie, to his mother, and to himself. He may be the main protagonist in this story, but definitely not his own. Arthur is a vessel in which we get to experience how day-to-day life can be so strange and cruel and beautiful. But Arthur chooses to remove himself from that, because why should it matter anyway? He lost not only his mother, his only friend, and intimate relationship, but also his autonomy. But we lose that when we die anyway, so what does it matter? Through meursault's story, we are given a special insight into exactly why life is beautiful and worth living, just perhaps not in the way we typically see. Arthur says that while reflecting in prison that he realized then that a man who had lived only one day could easily live for 100 years in prison. He would have enough memories to keep him from being bored. Quote, "As if that blind rage had washed me clean, rid me of hope, For the first time, in that night alive with signs and stars, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world, finding it so much like myself, so like a brother, really. Felt that I had been happy and that I was happy again, for everything to be consummated, for me to be less alone. For me to feel less alone. I had only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. And here are my works cited. Thank you.